The president's plan to charge $90 billion of fees from the banks is like making bank robbery legal and simply charging future bank robbers a tiny fee for the money they've stolen. Now, to be fair, GOP Chairman Michael Steele's response is equally misguided. To say that we've already been repaid, I guess it just goes to show that both parties are fooled when it comes to the great TARP lie. Joining us now, Elizabeth Warren, chair of the Congressional Oversight Panel, which today issued its latest report on the TARP program. And Professor Warren, it's a pleasure to welcome you back. What is your reaction to the news of the day and the president's bank fee?
Look, I'm glad to have $90 billion. But the bottom line is exactly where you put it. And what we talk about in this report is that when TARP expires, as it will on October 3rd, the real impact of TARP won't be gone. It's going to continue to echo throughout this economy. And one of the main ways in which it will do that is with the implicit guarantee. Last year, or what's it been now, 16 months ago, when Secretary Paulson came into Congress and said, I need $700 billion right now, and then turned around and used that to give it to the largest financial institutions, it was more than just the money. There was the statement, in effect, that no matter how many taxpayers we have to throw under the bus, we'll do it so that these big companies can survive. And that's going to linger even after every TARP dollar has been repaid, even after every other part of the guarantees have been erased. That will be the lasting impact of TARP.
You talk about some of the structural problems. I'd like to address a couple of them with you. On the one hand, we say that we want to create jobs in this country. We want more people working, but then we say, well, we can't add to the deficit. Well, but why do we have such a large deficit with people not working? We say we want the banks to lend more, make more loans, but at the same time we say, hang on, the banks can't be highly levered. We need the banks to reduce their leverage, which means they have to lend less. There are lists of these situations, which is the equivalent of me asking you to be tall and short at the same time. It's impossible. And when you get that type of contradiction, isn't that evidence that the system that the American political body and banking gods, if you will, created for us is one designed to extract and transfer? In other words, it creates those structural contradictions.
Well, you know, I think you put it in a good way when you talk about structural contradiction. Because I think that's exactly what we've got going on. The implicit guarantee is one of those structural contradictions. Treasury, when we get out of TARP, is going to have more than $100 billion in assets that it's going to manage. So the TARP Oversight Panel has said, explain to us what your principle is going to be for maximizing. And they said, oh, this is great. We have three principles simultaneously. We're going to make sure that the system is stabilized. We'll decide whether to sell and at what price based on that. We're going to save individual institutions, and we're going to maximize return for the taxpayer. You can't do all three of those at the same time. And so what Treasury's really left itself in a position of saying is whatever we do, we'll be able to justify. If you say, gee, you didn't maximize taxpayer return, they say, oh, we were actually trying to meet one of those other goals. So what we've got structurally is a circumstance in which there is no oversight, there is no transparency, there is no accountability within the system. What we're trying to do with oversight is at least point that out and make more demands on Treasury. But we have a big problem. That's a small example of it.
Yeah, I believe, and I think I've made this very clear, that the Treasury Secretary is the person who stands in the way of us learning more. I believe that he has an obligation to reveal the AIG emails and other things, but we can save that for another day. But I do want to bring up the Treasury Secretary's comments on the calculated cost of the bailout. He made this in an interview earlier this afternoon with CNBC's John Harwood. He says the ultimate cost of solving this financial crisis is going to be dramatically lower than anybody thought was possible. So conservative estimates, the cost of the crisis may be in the $100 million. I think that's a typo. I think it's supposed to say $100 billion range, but either one, a small number or slightly higher. When the Treasury does a calculation of $100 billion as the cost of this, do they integrate the $24 trillion in state support? Do they integrate the 20% real unemployment rate? Do they integrate the millions that have lost their homes? Do they integrate the tens of millions of seniors who are deprived of savings income because of artificially low rates? Is all that in the $100 billion?
No.
How do they calculate these numbers, and are they using the lie of the TARP? In other words, are they using the lie that the TARP is the only support as a way to pretend none of these other things even exist? None of these other things are being used to support the banking system, on the bet that either the press is too stupid to see it, the politicians are too bought to talk about it, or the electorate is too distracted to do anything about it?
The Treasury talks about the TARP money and the TARP money alone, how much we spent directly through TARP and how much we got back. Part of what we're trying to do in the oversight report, for example, is to talk about other costs, like the implicit guarantee. What Neil Barofsky, the Special Inspector General, has done has drawn our attention, as you have done, to all the other ways in which we have given extraordinary government support to a handful of large financial institutions.
Is the role of a bank in our society to exploit its access to our government in order to make the people that run it rich?
Well, you know, I thought yesterday was informative, if nothing else. The question was, following this enormous crisis, how much responsibility do you take? Which is really a question of how much do you plan to change your underlying business model? How much do you plan to change your practices? And I heard a message pretty loud and clear. We don't plan to change.
If I was giving you free money to gamble wildly with, would you change unless I made it against the law?
You know, it's a great business model that effectively says, look, come and invest your money with me because I'm a too big to fail financial institution. I'll take that money and I'll go to Las Vegas and I'll bet it all on Black 22. And if it comes in, woo, we're all rich. And if it doesn't come in, the taxpayers will pick up your losses. So this is the classic, you know, heads the investors, the big guys are going to win. Tails, the taxpayers are going to lose.
And in the process, you then redirect all of the investment, or a huge percentage of the investment capital that would have gone into other parts of our economy, from medicine to energy, get redirected because there's this legalized fraud going on, which provides much better returns than all the hard work of building windmills and curing cancer.
You know, I think that really is the cost, and this is one we'll never put a dollar figure on it. But these too big to fail institutions who can engage in highly risky and highly profitable activities are competing in the marketplace with every other kind of business, including intermediate size and small banks who certainly are not in a too big to fail position. So everyone else has to go out and compete for capital against guys who have that kind of business model and that kind of government backing. It distorts our entire economy. It means that the price we pay is reflected in virtually everything we buy and, frankly, everything we don't make.
Yeah.
That's the real cost here.
Professor, thank you so much. I will leave it there.